The gunmetal click of a safety disengaging cut through the Azure Lounge's velvet quiet like a blade through silk. 43 men in Brioni suits turned as one, their collective breath held in the space between heartbeats and catastrophe. The crystal tumbler of Macallan 1946, $15,000 of liquid amber, 6 decades of patience distilled into 18 ounces. Hovered 2 inches from Dante Volkov's lips when the scream shattered every assumption about how this Thursday evening would end. "Stop! Don't drink that!" The voice belonged to a child, 8 years old, maybe 70 pounds soaking wet, wearing a faded purple hoodie 2 sizes too large and sneakers held together with duct tape and stubborn hope. Her name was Zephyr Ashford, though in this moment she was simply the impossible. A sparrow who had flown into a den of wolves and somehow made them all freeze. 11 seconds from now, Zephyr would explain how she recognized the faint iridescent shimmer in that whiskey, the telltale bloom of arsenic powder catching light like oil on water. 17 seconds from now, Dante Volkov would realize this child had just saved his life using knowledge no 8-year-old should possess. 23 seconds from now, he would discover her last name and feel the floor tilt beneath him as ghosts he thought buried clawed their way back into the light. But first, in this crystallized instant, 43 guns swung toward a little girl whose right hand was raised like a crossing guard stopping traffic, whose left hand clutched a worn backpack containing 3 things: $83 in crumpled bills, a peanut butter sandwich in a Ziploc bag, and a photograph she didn't fully understand but carried everywhere. Because her father's last words had been, "Find the man in this picture when I'm gone." 8 hours earlier, when the sky over New Orleans still held the bruised purple of late afternoon and the Mississippi rolled past the French Quarter with its usual indifference to human drama, Zephyr had been sitting cross-legged on the floor of the Azure Lounge's staff break room, drawing superheroes in a spiral notebook. The heroes in her drawings never wore capes. They wore scrubs or overalls or waitress aprons, and they all had one thing in common. They arrived just in time to stop bad things from happening. In every drawing, someone who was about to die got pulled back from the edge. In every drawing, someone's daddy came home. Her sister Sienna moved through the prep work with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped expecting miracles. 28 years old, with hands that remembered suturing field wounds in Kandahar and eyes that still flinched at loud noises. She folded napkins into perfect triangles and polished wine glasses until they sang. The Azure Lounge paid $9 an hour plus tips, and if you kept your head down and your mouth shut, you could survive here. Surviving was all Sienna had left after losing her nursing license, after their father's death, after the $47,000 in medical debt that accumulated faster than she could count. "Stay in this room, Zeph. Don't wander. Don't talk to anyone." Sienna's voice carried the weight of someone who had given this instruction 1,000 times and knew it would be ignored at least once. Zephyr nodded without looking up from her drawing, a little girl pulling a man away from a glass of poisoned water, both figures smiling in the aftermath of catastrophe averted. The Azure Lounge occupied 3 floors of a converted cotton warehouse in the warehouse district, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs in the kind of studied elegance that cost more to fake than most people earned in a year. The VIP section on the 3rd floor existed in a separate reality from the rest of New Orleans, a hermetically sealed world where men made decisions that rippled out across shipping lanes and distribution networks and the lives of people who would never know their names. At precisely 4:17 p.m., Dante Volkov arrived. He didn't enter rooms so much as reorganize them around his presence. 6'2", moving with the coiled stillness of someone who had grown up learning to read violence in the micro-expressions of dangerous men. His suit was Armani, midnight blue so dark it ate light, and on his right hand He wore a ring of black jade carved into the shape of a tiger devouring its own tail. 15 bodyguards flanked him in a formation that looked casual, but had been drilled to perfection. Each man positioned to cover a specific angle of attack, each carrying enough firepower to start a small war. Zephyr watched through the 2-inch gap between the break room door and its frame. Something about the way Dante moved made her think of the nature documentaries her father used to watch. The ones about apex predators and the complex mathematics of survival. She had seen this man before, not in person, but in the photograph tucked in her backpack, the one where he looked younger and smiled like he still remembered how. The afternoon bled into evening. Sienna worked her section, keeping her eyes down and her interactions brief. In the break room, Zephyr's stomach started the low growl that signaled the peanut butter sandwich's time had come. She unwrapped it carefully, making each bite last, trying to remember if they had anything for dinner at home beyond the half can of soup and the sleeve of crackers that were definitely past their expiration date, but probably still safe if you scraped off the stale parts. By 7 p.m., the VIP floor had filled with the kind of men whose names appeared in federal indictments and society pages with equal frequency. They smoked Cuban cigars and discussed tonnage and shipping routes and percentages with the clinical detachment of surgeons discussing tumors. Dante sat at the head of the main table, speaking rarely, observing everything. His head of security, Konstantin Petrov, stood 3 feet behind his left shoulder, scanning the room with the systematic attention of someone who had kept dangerous men alive for 2 decades and didn't intend to break that streak tonight. The Macallan 1946 arrived at 7:43 p.m. in a presentation box lined with burgundy velvet, carried by Gideon Hale, the Azure Lounge's floor manager. Gideon had the kind of face that looked trustworthy in photographs and dead behind the eyes in person. He set the bottle before Dante with a theatrical flourish, explaining in hushed tones about the rarity, the provenance, the 27 bottles left in existence. Dante nodded once. Constantine poured, the amber liquid catching the chandelier light and throwing gold patterns across the white tablecloth. In the break room, Zephyr's sandwich was gone and her stomach had moved from growling to the hollow ache that meant she should probably find her sister and see if there was anything left from the staff meal. She stood, stretched, grabbed her backpack out of habit and pushed open the door. The hallway outside was deserted, all polished concrete and recessed lighting. Sienna had said to stay in the room, but Sienna said a lot of things, and Zephyr had learned that some rules were more like suggestions. Especially when you were 8 and hungry and bored beyond reason. She turned left instead of right, following the sound of voices and the smell of something that might be food. 3 wrong turns later, she was thoroughly lost in a part of the building she had never seen. All dark wood and closed doors and the kind of quiet that made her footsteps sound like gunshots. She was about to turn back when she heard it. A rhythmic clicking, metal on metal, 3 beats in rapid succession. Click, snap, click, snap, click, snap. The sound pulled her forward. She knew that sound. She had heard it in her nightmares in the hospital room where her father died, in the moments before consciousness fled and took him with it. Her father had described it in his last lucid moments, when the poison was shutting down his organs one by one and he was using his final breaths to give her instructions she was too young to understand. Listen, baby girl, if you ever hear someone with a silver lighter, clicking it 3 times like a heartbeat, you run. You run and you find the man in the photograph and you say the words I taught you. Zephyr crept forward, making herself small against the wall. Through a partially open service door, she saw him. Tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing the blue maintenance coveralls that all the building's staff wore. But something about the fit was wrong. The shoulders bunched where they should have laid flat. The sleeves stopped an inch short of his wrists. He stood beside a serving cart, the kind waiters used to bring bottles from the wine cellar. On the cart sat a velvet-lined box, and in his hand he held a small glass vial filled with powder that caught the light with an iridescent shimmer, silver and violet in the color of death. Zephyr's lungs forgot how to work. The man in maintenance coveralls opened the Macallan 1946 with practiced care, broke the seal without disturbing the wax, poured the powder in a thin stream that disappeared into the amber depths. He shook the bottle once, gentle, the motion of someone who had done this before. Then he took a silk cloth from his pocket and wiped the bottle's neck and seal with the attention to detail of someone who understood fingerprints and forensics and the importance of leaving no evidence. As he worked, his collar slipped to one side, revealing a scar that ran from his jawline down into his shirt, a jagged lightning bolt of keloid tissue, the kind of burn that spoke of fires survived and flesh rebuilt. The man lifted the bottle to examine his work. The light caught the powder's shimmer for just a moment before it settled into invisibility. Satisfied, he replaced the bottle in its velvet box, closed the lid with a soft click, and then he looked directly at the security camera mounted in the corner and smiled. It wasn't a smile of nervousness or guilt. It was the smile of someone making a statement, someone who wanted to be remembered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver lighter, flipped it open with his thumb. The flame didn't catch, but the sound did, that distinctive click-snap of quality craftsmanship, the kind of lighter that cost more than most people's rent. Click-snap, click-snap, click-snap. Zephyr's hands found the doorframe to keep herself upright. The man pocketed the lighter and spoke, soft and measured, into a wire that ran from his ear down into his collar. Package delivered. The tiger falls at midnight. Tell him the city wakes under a new moon. Then he picked up the cart and wheeled it toward the service elevator, whistling something that might have been a lullaby or a dirge, leaving Zephyr pressed against the wall with her heart trying to break through her ribs and her father's voice echoing in her memory. She ran, not toward the break room or her sister or safety, but toward the sound of voices from the VIP floor, because the man in the photograph was up there, and he was about to drink poison, and her father had said. What had he said exactly? The words jumbled in her panic, fragments of deathbed instructions that she had been too young to process and too traumatized to forget. The tiger owes the sparrow. If I die, you find him. You tell him what I told you. He'll protect you when I can't. Zephyr hit the VIP floor at a dead sprint, her backpack bouncing against her spine, her sneakers squeaking on the polished hardwood. The main room opened before her in a blur of cigar smoke and expensive cologne and men in suits who turned with synchronized precision as this child exploded into their carefully controlled world. At the head of the table, Dante Volkov raised the crystal tumbler to his lips. Zephyr's voice came out as a scream that scraped her throat raw. Stop! Don't drink that! The room crystallized into absolute stillness. 43 hands moved toward 43 concealed weapons. Constantine's gun cleared his shoulder holster before Zephyr's next breath, the muzzle tracking her center mass with the calm precision of someone who had made harder shots under worse conditions. Dante's hand stopped, the tumbler 2 inches from his mouth. His eyes, dark as river stones, old beyond his 45 years, fixed on this child who had just committed what could generously be called suicide by bodyguard. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then Sienna appeared in the doorway behind Zephyr, her face white as snow, her hands raised in the universal gesture of please don't shoot, we're not a threat. Oh God, I'm so sorry, Mr. Volkov. She's just a child, she doesn't. The wine has silver dust. Zephyr's voice cut through her sister's apology, steady now, the panic burned away by the certainty that she was right about this, that her father hadn't been crazy or paranoid or seeing threats that didn't exist. It's poison. I saw him put it in. The room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. Constantine took 2 steps forward, his free hand reaching for Zephyr with the clear intention of removing her from this space and probably from continued existence. But Dante raised 1 finger, just one, barely a movement, and everyone froze again. How do you know? His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. When Dante Volkov asked a question, people answered, and the consequences of lying were severe and permanent. Zephyr met his eyes. Up close, she could see the photograph's ghost in his face, the same sharp cheekbones, the same way his jaw set when he was thinking. But the smile was gone and something harder had replaced it. Because that's how my daddy died. Same silver dust in his drink. It made the liquid shimmer just a little, like oil on water. He taught me to recognize it before he... Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, forced the words out. Before it killed him. Constantine moved to the table without lowering his weapon, lifted the tumbler, tilted it under the chandelier's light. For a moment, nothing. Then there, just barely visible if you knew what to look for. An iridescent swirl in the amber depths, a faint prismatic shimmer that didn't belong in 60-year-old scotch. Boss. Constantine's voice carried everything that needed saying. Dante set the tumbler down with exaggerated care as if it might detonate and turned his full attention to Zephyr. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle, cedar and smoke, and see the faint scar above his left eyebrow where something sharp had found him years ago. What's your name? Zephyr. Zephyr Ashford. The name hit him like a physical blow. She watched the color drain from his face, watched his knuckles go white where they gripped the table's edge, watched recognition and disbelief and something that might have been grief flash across features that usually revealed nothing. Behind him, Constantine lowered his weapon completely, his own face gone slack with shock. Ashford, as in Tobias Ashford? Sienna's voice came out as a whisper. He was our father. He died 2 years ago. Dante stood slowly, the motion carrying the weight of someone reassembling themselves after an unexpected impact. He looked at Zephyr the way you might look at a ghost or a miracle or a debt you thought you'd escaped finally coming due. His hand moved to the inside pocket of his jacket, withdrew a leather billfold, flipped it open to reveal a photograph protected behind clear plastic. The photo showed 3 men in their 20s, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the easy confidence of people who still believed the world was conquerable. Zephyr recognized her father immediately. Younger, healthier, alive. The man on the left was Dante. Before time and violence had carved away everything soft, the man on the right had light hair and a smile that looked like it came easily, before half his face had been turned to scar tissue. Your father and I were friends, a long time ago before... Dante's voice caught, reset. He saved my life more than once. I thought I'd lost track of his family after he left the business. I didn't know he'd died, I'm sorry. Zephyr reached into her backpack, pulled out her own photograph, the same image, but larger, printed on photo paper that was creased and worn from years of handling. She flipped it over, showing the handwriting on the back, her father's cramped script in blue ballpoint ink. Dante, if I die, protect my girls. The tiger owes the sparrow. T. The message hung in the air between them, a promise made by a dead man to someone who hadn't known he needed to keep it. Dante read the words twice, his jaw working, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. When he looked up, his gaze swept the room, landing on each of his lieutenants in turn, a silent command that everyone understood. This conversation was private, and anyone who repeated it wouldn't have the opportunity to make that mistake twice. Both of you, come with me, now. It wasn't a request. Dante moved toward a door at the back of the VIP floor, and Constantine fell into step behind him, gesturing for Sienna and Zephyr to follow. Sienna grabbed her sister's hand, gripping tight enough to hurt, her eyes screaming what her mouth couldn't say. What have you done? What have you gotten us into? How do we survive this? Dante's private office was smaller than Zephyr expected, lined with books in languages she didn't recognize and dominated by a desk that looked older than the building. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon from a different bottle, One he opened himself after checking the seal with the paranoia of someone who now had excellent reason for paranoia. He drank half of it in one swallow, then turned to face them. "Tell me about the man you saw. Everything. Don't leave anything out." Zephyr closed her eyes, letting the memory sharpen into focus. Tall, maybe 6 feet. He walked with a limp, like his left leg was stiff. Blue maintenance coveralls, but they didn't fit right, too big in the shoulders. When he reached for the bottle, his collar moved and I saw his neck. There was a scar, a bad one, like lightning made of burned skin going from under his jaw down into his shirt. Dante's hand clenched around the bourbon glass hard enough that Zephyr worried it might shatter. Behind him, Constantine had gone absolutely still, the kind of stillness that meant violence was being carefully controlled. What else? Any other details, no matter how small? He had a lighter, silver, expensive looking. He kept flicking it open and closed 3 times, always 3. Click, snap, click, snap, click, snap, like a heartbeat. Zephyr's voice dropped to barely a whisper. My daddy described that exact sound. The night before he died, when he was still trying to warn me about things, he said, "If I ever heard someone doing that with a lighter, I should run." Dante drained the rest of his bourbon, set the glass down with exaggerated care, and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen with the speed of someone sending a message that couldn't wait. Within seconds, responses started flooding back, the phone vibrating against the desk like a trapped insect. "Constantine, lock down the building. Every floor, every exit. Nobody leaves until we find out who cleared that maintenance worker through security. And get Gideon up here, now." The big Russian nodded once and disappeared into the hallway. Dante turned back to Zephyr and Sienna, his expression softening slightly, the way you might gentle your voice when explaining bad news to someone who didn't deserve it. "What your father wrote is true. I owe him more than I can repay, and that debt transfers to you. But right now, you're both in danger. The man you described, if he's who I think he is, shouldn't exist. He died 6 years ago in a warehouse fire. I watched the building collapse. There was no way anyone survived." Zephyr thought about the scar, the way burned flesh heals into landscape. Maybe he almost didn't. Maybe. Dante pulled out the photograph of the 3 young men again, tapped the one on the right with the easy smile. His name was Lucien Moreau. We grew up together, worked together, were closer than brothers. Until I had to make a choice between him and everything I'd built. I chose wrong and people died because of it. If he's alive, if he's been alive this whole time, then tonight isn't just about killing me. It's about making me suffer first. Sienna found her voice small and shaking. What did the man say when he was talking into his wire? "The tiger falls at midnight. Tell him the city wakes under a new moon." The words settled over the room like a curse. Dante checked his watch. A Patek Philippe that probably cost more than Sienna made in a year, and his face went carefully blank. "It's 8:42. That gives us 3 hours and 18 minutes to figure out what else he's planned, because poison in my drink is just the opening move." Gideon Hale arrived 4 minutes later, slightly out of breath, his professional smile faltering when he saw the grim faces waiting for him. Constantine shut the door behind him with the finality of a cell locking. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Volkov. The Macallan 1946, who authorized it? Who brought it up from the cellar? Who handled it between the vault and my table?" Gideon's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "I did, sir. It was on tonight's service list, marked for your table specifically. The bottle was selected this morning, brought up at 6 p.m., kept in the climate-controlled case until presentation. Who else touched it? Just me and Marco from the cellar. We both wore gloves, per protocol." Dante gestured to Constantine, who produced a tablet from somewhere inside his jacket and pulled up security footage. The screen showed the wine cellar, timestamp reading 1800 hours, Gideon and another man in server uniforms carefully removing the Macallan from its storage slot. Constantine fast-forwarded through the next hour, tracking the bottle's journey from cellar to climate case to serving cart. The footage showed no tampering, no suspicious pauses, no maintenance workers in ill-fitting coveralls. Run it back. Show me the hallway outside the prep area, 1700 to 1900 hours. Constantine's fingers danced across the screen, pulling up different camera angles. They watched an hour of footage in fast-forward, staff moving in and out, normal traffic, nothing suspicious. Then at 1847, the screen went to static for exactly 90 seconds. When the image returned, everything looked normal, but Constantine's expression said otherwise. "Boss, that's a loop. Someone edited the feed." Dante's voice dropped to something cold and precise. "Gideon, you have 5 seconds to tell me how someone accessed our security system with your credentials, or Constantine will start breaking fingers until you remember." The floor manager's professional composure shattered like dropped crystal. I didn't. My access card went missing 2 days ago. I reported it to security. I filled out the forms. It should have been deactivated. Should have been, but wasn't." Dante turned to Constantine. "Pull the access logs. Find out who used Gideon's credentials and when. Then find out who was supposed to deactivate them and didn't. This isn't sloppy. This is surgical." Zephyr had been watching Gideon's face while the adults talked, the way his eyes kept darting toward the door, the way his breathing had gone shallow and fast. She knew that look. She'd seen it on the playground when kids were lying about who started the fight, when they were guilty but hoping the teacher wouldn't notice. "Mr. Volkov?" Her small voice cut through the tension. Dante looked down at her, and she saw him making the effort to soften his expression, to remember she was 8 and scared and not part of the world that produced men like Lucien Moreau. "You can call me Dante, sweetheart. What is it?" "Mr. Gideon is lying. Not about the card, I think that part is true, but he knows something else. Something he's afraid to say because the person who scares him more than you will hurt someone he loves." The room went silent. Gideon's face cycled through denial, outrage, and finally resignation, as he realized an 8-year-old had just read him better than professional interrogators might have managed. "My son." His voice broke on the words. "They have my son. He's 6 years old. They took him from school yesterday, sent me a video of him crying, said if I didn't help them they'd—" He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Dante's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the set of his shoulders, the angle of his head. "Who took him? Give me a name." "I don't know. They only sent messages, blocked numbers, used voice changers, but they knew things, personal things, details about Jake that only someone close to us could know. They knew which school, which classroom, what time his mother picked him up. They sent photos from inside our house." Constantine was already typing, pulling up files, cross-referencing data. "Boss, if someone inside our organization is feeding intel to—" His phone rang, cutting him off mid-sentence. Constantine glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered on speaker. "This is a secure line. Who is this?" "Hello, Constantine. It's been a long time." The voice that came through the speaker was rough, damaged, like someone had taken sandpaper to their vocal cords and left them scarred and strange. But underneath the damage there was something familiar, something that made Dante's hands ball into fists and his breathing go shallow. "Lucien. Good, you remember. I was worried 6 years might have dulled your memory, brother. But then some things you don't forget, do you? Like the sound of someone screaming your name while they burn alive, like the smell of flesh when it melts, like the last words of someone who loved you, begging you to save them and hearing you walk away instead." Dante grabbed the phone from Constantine, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Where's the boy, Gideon's son? Let him go. This is between us." "Oh, Dante, always so noble when it costs you nothing. But you're wrong. This isn't between us. This is about debts unpaid, lives stolen, futures burned to ash because you chose your empire over the people who built it with you. Jake is safe for now. Whether he stays that way depends entirely on how you spend the next. A pause. The sound of a lighter clicking open and closed 3 times. 3 hours and 14 minutes. What do you want? I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to watch everything you built crumble. I want you to lose the people you should have protected. And when midnight comes, when the clock strikes and the city wakes under a new moon, I want you to understand that some sins don't get forgiven. They just come due. The line went dead. Dante stared at the phone for a long moment, his face unreadable, before setting it carefully on the desk. When he looked up, his eyes had gone hard and distant, the expression of someone making calculations about acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices. Constantine, how many men do we have in the building? 15 with us, another 30 in reserve within 10 minutes. The building is locked down tight. Not tight enough. Lucien was here in this building in my prep area touching my whiskey. He walked past our cameras, used our security protocols, and left a signature because he wanted me to know he could, which means he has help inside our organization, and we don't know who or how deep it goes. Zephyr had been holding Sienna's hand through all of this, feeling her sister's pulse hammer against her palm. Now she spoke up again, her voice small but clear. He doesn't want to kill you quick. He wants you to hurt first. That's why he poisoned the drink, but also made sure I'd see him do it. He knew I'd tell you. He wanted you to know. Dante looked at her with something approaching respect. You're right. This whole thing is theater. The question is, what comes in Act 2? The answer arrived 60 seconds later when every light in the Azure Lounge died at once, plunging 3 floors into absolute darkness. Emergency generators kicked in after a 3-second delay, bathing everything in the red glow of backup power, and somewhere far below them someone started screaming. Constantine had his weapon drawn before the lights came back up, his body positioned between Dante and the door. Dante moved to a panel hidden behind a painting, pressed his palm against it, and a section of wall slid back to reveal an arsenal that would have made most small armies jealous. Sienna, take Zephyr to the vault. Biometric lock, independent oxygen supply, reinforced steel. You'll be safe there. Sienna moved immediately, pulling Zephyr toward the newly revealed doorway, but Zephyr dug in her heels. No, I stay. I can help. Sweetheart, this isn't... I know who Mr. Lucien is. I know why he's angry, and I know something else. She pulled out the photograph again, the one from her backpack, and turned it over to show the full message on the back, the part she hadn't read aloud before. Dante, if I die, protect my girls. The tiger owes the sparrow. She knows the truth about Isabel. She knows what really happened that night, minus T. Dante took the photograph with hands that shook slightly. Reading the words once, twice, 3 times as if they might change meaning through repetition. When he looked up at Zephyr, his face had gone pale. What do you know about Isabel? My daddy told me, before he died. He made me promise to remember, to tell you if he couldn't. He said you blamed yourself for her death, but it wasn't your fault. He said someone else was in that warehouse, someone who opened the door and let the fire in on purpose. Someone who wanted both Isabel and Mr. Lucien to die so they could take your empire. The room had gone absolutely silent. Even Constantine had lowered his weapon, staring at this 8-year-old girl who had just dropped a truth bomb that rewrote 6 years of history. Dante's voice came out barely above a whisper. Who? Who opened the door? Daddy didn't know for sure, but he had a guess. He said to look for the person who benefited most from the fire, who got promoted after, who nobody suspected because they were always so loyal. Zephyr paused, gathering courage. He said to look for the person who would be standing closest to you when everything fell apart, the person you'd never suspect because suspecting them would mean admitting you were blind. Dante turned slowly to look at Gideon, who had gone white as chalk. I swear, Mr. Volkov, I don't know anything about... Not you. Dante's voice was quiet, thoughtful, running through mental calculations. You're a pawn. Someone bigger is moving the pieces, someone who knew about Jake, who could access our security, who could get Lucian close enough to poison my drink. The office door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by shaped charges that left everyone's ears ringing and filled the room with smoke. Through the haze came figures in tactical gear, weapons raised, moving with the precision of professionals who had drilled this entry 100 times. Constantine fired first, 3 rapid shots that dropped the lead attacker. Then the room erupted into chaos, muzzle flashes strobing in the red emergency lighting, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing off brick walls, Sienna screaming her sister's name as Dante grabbed Zephyr and dove behind the desk. The firefight lasted 18 seconds. When it ended, 3 attackers were down. Constantine was reloading with blood streaming from a graze across his shoulder, and Dante was checking Zephyr for injuries with hands that had steadied now that violence had given him something concrete to fight. "You okay? Did anything hit you?" Zephyr shook her head, too shocked for words. Her ears rang from the gunfire, and there was blood on her hoodie that she was pretty sure wasn't hers. Dante pulled her close, one arm around her shoulders, and she felt him shaking. Not from fear, but from adrenaline, from rage, from the accumulated weight of 6 years of guilt being weaponized against him. "The vault, now, both of you. This is not a request." This time, Sienna didn't argue. She grabbed Zephyr's hand, and they ran for the hidden door as Constantine covered their retreat, firing controlled bursts down the hallway at targets Zephyr couldn't see. The vault was exactly what Dante promised. A steel-lined room with its own air supply, walls thick enough to stop anything short of military-grade explosives, and a biometric lock that required both palm print and retinal scan. Dante pressed his hand to the scanner, leaned in for the eye check, and the massive door swung open on hydraulics that whispered like secrets. Inside was a space about the size of a large closet, lined with monitors showing security feeds from around the building, a weapons rack, and a first aid kit that looked serious enough to handle anything short of major surgery. "Lock yourselves in. Don't open this door for anyone, not Constantine, not the police, not God himself, only me. You understand?" Sienna nodded, pulling Zephyr inside. But before the door could close, Zephyr pushed back, meeting Dante's eyes. "The tiger owes the sparrow. You promised my daddy. That means you have to survive this. You have to win." Dante knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level, and for just a moment the mask slipped and she saw the man beneath the legend. Tired, grieving, carrying ghosts he couldn't bury. "I know what I promised, and I know what I owe. But debts don't matter if we're both dead, so you stay here and stay safe and let me do what I do best." He stood, started to turn away, then paused and pulled something from his pocket, a small pendant on a silver chain, black jade carved in the shape of a tiger. He placed it in Zephyr's palm, closing her fingers around it. "This belonged to someone I loved very much, someone I failed to protect. Don't let me fail again." The vault door swung shut with a sound like the world ending, leaving Zephyr and Sienna in a steel tomb with nothing but monitors and memories, and the mounting certainty that 3 hours and 8 minutes until midnight was both an eternity and nowhere near enough time. The vault's silence pressed against Zephyr's eardrums like water at depth. Through the monitors mounted along the wall, she watched Dante move through the Azure Lounge's corridors with the fluid economy of someone who had survived by being faster, smarter, and more willing to cross lines than his enemies. Constantine flanked him 3 steps back, his wounded shoulder already field-dressed with gauze that was turning red at the edges. Sienna sat with her back against the steel wall, arms wrapped around her knees, breathing in the shallow rhythm of someone fighting panic. The medical training that had once made her steady in Kandahar operating rooms seemed very far away now, buried under 2 years of waitressing and debt collection calls, and the slow erosion of believing things could get better. "How long do you think we'll be in here?" Her voice came out small, younger than 28, and Zephyr recognized the tone. It was the same one Sienna used when the electricity got shut off, or the rent was due and they were $300 short. The voice of someone who had learned that asking questions didn't change outcomes, but sometimes made the waiting easier. Until midnight, maybe, or until he fixes everything. Zephyr pressed her palm against the monitor showing Dante's office, watching him and Constantine drag bodies out of frame with the clinical efficiency of men who had done this before and would likely do it again. The tiger pendant hung cold against her chest, tucked under her hoodie where Sienna couldn't see it and ask questions Zephyr didn't know how to answer. On screen 3, movement caught her attention. A figure in tactical gear approaching from the service stairwell, weapon raised, moving with the careful precision of someone checking corners. Zephyr's finger found the intercom button before conscious thought caught up. "Dante, screen 3. Someone's coming." Her voice crackled through speakers somewhere in the building. On screen 1, Dante's head snapped up, his eyes finding the nearest camera. He mouthed something that might have been "good girl" or "stay quiet" before gesturing to Constantine and melting into shadows that shouldn't have been deep enough to hide a man his size. The tactical figure advanced. 3 steps. 5. Reaching the office doorway where bodies still leaked onto expensive hardwood, the figure paused, weapons sweeping left and right, then pushed forward into the kill zone. Constantine exploded from behind a support column, tackling the intruder with enough force to crack ribs. They went down in a tangle of limbs and body armor, rolling across the floor in a struggle too close for firearms. The intruder's helmet came loose, rolling away to reveal not a man, a woman maybe 30 with a scar bisecting her left eyebrow and eyes that held the flat effect of someone who killed for money and slept fine afterward. She got a knee into Constantine's gut, drove her forehead into his nose with a sound like a branch breaking, and rolled free with a knife suddenly in her hand. Dante was already moving. His kick caught her wrist before the blade could find Constantine's throat, sending the knife spinning into darkness. The woman flowed with the impact instead of fighting it, using the momentum to sweep Dante's legs. He went down hard but turned the fall into a roll that brought him up with a gun he must have palmed from somewhere. "On the ground, face down, hands where I can see them." The woman smiled, blood from a split lip painting her teeth red. She didn't move to comply, just shifted her weight like a boxer finding her stance. "You're slower than I expected. Lucien said you'd gone soft, but I thought he was exaggerating." He wasn't. Constantine gained his feet, bleeding from his nose and the reopened shoulder wound, murder written in every line of his posture. Dante held up one hand, keeping him back, keeping this moment contained to words instead of letting it escalate to violence that would yield nothing but corpses. "You're going to tell me everything Lucien has planned. The timeline, the targets, how many more of you are in this building. You're going to tell me because the alternative is Constantine, and Constantine doesn't have my patience or my ethics." Ethics. That's rich coming from you. Isabel had ethics. Tobias Ashford had ethics. Look where it got them. The name detonated in the confined space like a flashbang. Dante's gun hand wavered for just a fraction, just long enough for the woman to trigger something hidden in her remaining glove. The sharp crack of a primer charge, the acrid smell of burning chemicals, and then smoke, dense, white, flooding the office faster than seemed physically possible. Zephyr lost visual on all 3 of them as the smoke consumed the camera's field of view. She heard gunshots, 3 quick reports, then silence heavy enough to feel. When the smoke cleared 30 seconds later, the woman was gone. Constantine was down on one knee, gasping, and Dante stood over him checking for additional wounds with hands that moved on autopilot while his mind was clearly elsewhere. She knew Tobias. She knew his name, knew what happened to him. Constantine spat blood, wiped his destroyed nose with the back of his hand. "Boss, we need to fall back. Regroup. This building is compromised 6 ways from Sunday, and we're bleeding personnel we can't replace. We should take the girls and extract while we still can." "Extract to where? You think Lucien doesn't have every exit watched? The moment we step outside, we're fish in a barrel." At least here I know the terrain, know the blind spots, know which walls are load-bearing and which are just for show. Dante pulled Constantine to his feet, steadying him when he swayed. The big Russian had taken damage that would have hospitalized a normal person. But he shook it off with the grim determination of someone who had fought through worse and would do it again because the alternative was death or dishonor, and neither was acceptable. Through the intercom, Zephyr cleared her throat. Both men's eyes found the nearest camera. "Mr. Dante, the lady said Lucien told her things about you, which means they've been talking, planning this, which means he's been watching you for a while, learning your patterns. Where do you go when you're not here?" The question hung in the air while Dante processed its implications. His face went through several expressions too fast to catalog before settling on something that looked like respect mixed with the kind of concern you reserve for children who are too smart for their own safety. "Home. My house in the Garden District, but that's—" He stopped, pulled out his phone with hands that had started shaking again, dialed a number that rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Maria, call me back immediately. Lock all the doors, set the alarm to panic mode, and get to the safe room with Isabella. This is not a drill." He hung up, redialed, same result. Tried another number and another, working through what must have been a household staff with increasing desperation and 0 responses. "Constantine, pull up external feeds on my residence, now!" The Russian produced his tablet, fingers flying across the screen despite the blood making everything slippery. The image that resolved showed a mansion in the Garden District, all Greek Revival columns and manicured gardens lit up like Christmas in what should have been night-dark elegance. Every light in the building was on, blazing against the darkness in a way that suggested celebration or catastrophe. Dante zoomed in on the front door, which stood open. Zoomed further to show the entrance hall where a woman in a housekeeper's uniform lay motionless on imported marble. The timestamp in the corner read 21:47, 8 minutes ago, while they were fighting the woman with the scarred eyebrow, while Lucien's people were running interference. "Isabella, my daughter. She's 6 years old. If he's touched her—" Constantine gripped Dante's shoulder hard enough to bruise. "We'll get her back, but we can't do that if we're dead. We need a plan, and the plan can't be rushing in blind with rage instead of tactics." Zephyr watched Dante struggle with this, watched him want to abandon everything and sprint toward his home and his child, watched him force himself to think instead of react. The monitors showed different angles of the mansion. Back entrance also open, garage empty of the 3 cars that should have been parked there, swimming pool lights casting blue ripples across windows that should have been dark. The timeline! Everything happens at midnight, 3 hours after Lucien made first contact. That can't be arbitrary. He's working towards something specific, some grand gesture. The poison was step 1. Establish that he can reach me anywhere. The attack here was step 2. Prove he has numbers and resources. Taking Isabella is step 3, but there has to be a step 4, something that ties it all together. Sienna had been listening to this exchange with the kind of focused intensity that came from years of triage training, sorting information into categories of immediate versus important versus background noise. Now she spoke up, her voice steadier than it had been. "He said, the city wakes under a new moon. New moon means darkness, no light. In some traditions it means rebirth, new beginnings. If he's planning something at midnight, something public enough to qualify as the city waking up, he's not just after revenge. He's after succession. He wants your empire." Dante turned to look at the vault door as if he could see through the steel to the woman behind it. "You're right. This isn't about killing me. It's about replacing me, taking everything I built and claiming it as his own, with my death as the opening act and my daughter as—" He couldn't finish that thought. Didn't need to. Zephyr pressed both hands against the monitor, her reflection ghosting over the image of Dante's ravaged office. "My daddy used to say the best way to beat someone who knows all your moves is to make new ones. Stop doing what Mr. Lucien expects. Do something he can't predict. Like what? Like trusting me. The words came out before Zephyr fully understood what she was offering. Sienna grabbed her arm, horror and disbelief warring across her face. Absolutely not. Whatever you're thinking, no, you're 8 years old, Zeph. This is not, you can't. I can fit places adults can't. I'm small enough that people don't notice me until it's too late. And Lucien doesn't know I exist. He knows about you, Sienna, knows you work here. But he doesn't know Daddy had 2 daughters. He doesn't know there's a sparrow in the tiger's den. Dante's expression cycled through a dozen objections before landing on something that looked like resignation mixed with the desperate mathematics of impossible choices. He spoke into the intercom with a voice that had aged a decade in the last hour. What exactly are you proposing? Let me out. Let me help. I know this building. I've been sneaking around it for 6 months while Sienna worked. I know the vent system, the service corridors, the places where the cameras don't quite reach. I can move without being seen. I can get to places you can't without starting a firefight. To do what? Zephyr had been thinking about this while watching the monitors, watching how Lucien's people moved, watching the patterns in their assault. To find the person who's helping from inside, the one my daddy warned about. They have to be coordinating with Mr. Lucien somehow, feeding him information in real time. If I can find them, maybe I can find out where Isabella is before midnight. Sienna pulled Zephyr away from the intercom, crouching down to eye level with an intensity that made Zephyr's throat tight. Listen to me. Daddy died trying to protect people from men like this. I will not let you throw yourself into danger because you think you owe some debt to a man you met an hour ago. We survive, Zeph. That's what we do. We keep our heads down and we survive. Surviving isn't living. Daddy used to say that too. He said sometimes you have to stand up even when sitting down is safer, because sitting down means letting bad things happen to people who don't deserve it. Daddy's dead. And you're all I have left. So no, the answer is no, and it stays no, and we are not having this argument. But even as Sienna said it, Zephyr could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The same calculation that had made her join the army at 18 despite their father's objections. The same calculation that had made her perform field surgery on civilians despite orders to the contrary. The same calculation that had cost her everything she'd worked for but saved lives she would never meet. The intercom crackled. Dante's voice came through rough with something that might have been respect or regret or both. Sienna, I know what I'm asking. I know what your father would say, and he'd be right to say it. But my daughter is out there, and if there's a chance, any chance, to get her back before Lucien uses her to make whatever statement he's building toward, I have to take it. I owe Tobias that much. I owe his daughters that much. You owe us our lives. Keeping Zephyr safe is how you pay that debt, not by turning her into a child soldier in your war. I'm not asking her to fight. I'm asking her to be eyes and ears, to move through spaces we can't reach and report back what she finds, that's all. The moment she's at risk, the moment anything feels wrong, she retreats and we lock her back in the vault. Sienna stood, her whole body vibrating with barely contained fury and fear and the horrible awareness that she was being backed into a corner by circumstances she couldn't control. She looked at the monitors showing Dante's mansion, at the still form of the housekeeper, at the open doors that screamed violation and violence. If anything happens to her, anything, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you regret it. I don't care how dangerous you are or how many people you have. I will find a way. I know. I'm counting on it. That's how I know you'll fight just as hard to protect her as I will to protect Isabella. The vault door's hydraulics hissed to life, the massive steel wheels spinning as locks disengaged in sequence. Sienna grabbed Zephyr's shoulders one more time, searching her face for something. Doubt, fear, hesitation, that might give her an excuse to shut this down. But Zephyr had made her decision, and the set of her jaw was pure Tobias Ashford, stubborn past reason and brave past sense. If Daddy were here, What would he tell you to do? Sienna's laugh came out broken. He'd tell me to let you try. He'd say some birds are meant to fly even when the sky is full of predators. He'd probably also say I was the smart one for knowing when to stay grounded. The door swung open to reveal Dante and Constantine, both looking worse than they had 15 minutes ago, both carrying fresh weapons and the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. Dante knelt in front of Zephyr, his face level with hers, and she could smell the copper tang of blood on his clothes mixed with smoke and cordite. Rules. You follow them exactly or this stops immediately. 1. You stay on the intercom channel at all times. I need to hear where you are and what you're seeing. 2. At the first sign of danger, you retreat to the nearest secure location and wait for extraction. 3. You do not engage anyone. You do not try to be a hero. You observe and report, and that is all. Understood? Zephyr nodded, her heart hammering so hard she wondered if he could hear it. Dante reached into his jacket and pulled out a small earpiece, the kind that sat nearly invisible in the ear canal, and a phone that looked too expensive to exist. This phone has one app. It's connected to our security system. You'll see camera feeds, floor plans, and real-time updates on where our people are positioned. The red dots are confirmed hostiles. The green dots are my people. Gray dots are unknowns. You stay away from red and gray. You move toward green if you need help. The earpiece keeps you connected to me and Constantine. We can hear everything you hear, see everything the cameras see when you're in their range. He fitted the earpiece into Zephyr's ear with surprising gentleness, then showed her how to activate the phone's panic button. 3 quick taps on the screen that would bring every available asset to her location, whether she wanted them or not. The vents! You said you know them. Show me. Zephyr led them through the vault's back wall, which concealed a maintenance access that Dante had probably forgotten existed. The vent system sprawled through the building's skeleton like arteries through a body, carrying air and sound and secrets between floors. Zephyr had spent months mapping it while Sienna worked late shifts, finding the routes that connected to ground level, to the roof, to spaces where adults couldn't follow. She pointed to a junction box where 3 ducts intersected. This one goes to the server room where all the security feeds route through. This one goes to the manager's office on the 2nd floor. And this one drops into the kitchen prep area where I saw the man with the lighter. Constantine studied the schematic on his tablet, comparing it to what Zephyr was describing. The server room. If someone's feeding intel to Lucien in real time, that's where they'd need access. Can you get there without being seen? Yes, but the vent grills are bolted from the inside. I'd need something to unscrew them. Dante handed her a multi-tool that probably cost more than a month's rent, compact enough to fit in her pocket. Can you use this? Zephyr had watched her father repair everything from bicycles to leaking pipes with similar tools. She flicked through the attachments, finding the screwdriver heads, the pliers, the knife blade that was sharp enough to make Sienna flinch. I can use it. Then go. But Zephyr? Dante caught her hand before she could climb into the vent. Your father was one of the bravest men I ever knew. He saved my life more times than I can count, not because I deserved it, but because he believed people could change, could be better than their worst choices. If you're anything like him, I'm in good hands. But that also means I'm terrified for you, because bravery and survival don't always shake hands at the end. So please, be careful, be smart, and come back. Zephyr squeezed his hand once, feeling the calluses and scars that mapped out a life of violence she was only beginning to understand. Then she was climbing into the vent, pulling herself forward on her elbows, leaving behind the vault and her sister and any illusion that tonight would end without more ghosts to carry. The vent system swallowed sound, turning the building's chaos into distant thunder. Filtered through metal and insulation, Zephyr navigated by memory and the faint glow of the phone's screen, following the route that should take her to the server room without passing through any major intersections where Lucien's people might be waiting. Dante's voice ghosted through the earpiece, quiet enough that she had to strain to hear. I'm seeing your location on the grid. You're doing great. The server room is 2 more junctions ahead, then down 1 level. Current occupancy shows 3 people, 1 of mine, 2 unknowns. Approach with caution. The metal beneath Zephyr's palms carried vibrations from the building's distress. Footsteps running, doors slamming, the occasional percussion of gunfire from floors she couldn't see. She moved slowly, testing each section before committing her weight, remembering how her father had taught her to distribute pressure across surfaces that might not hold. The junction ahead opened onto a vertical shaft, dropping 1 floor. Zephyr eased herself over the edge, feet finding purchase on the metal rungs welded to the shaft's interior, and descended into darkness that the phone's screen barely dented. At the bottom, the horizontal vent continued toward a grill that glowed with the blue-white light of computer monitors. She pressed her face to the grill, trying to see into the server room. Rows of equipment racks hummed with the white noise of cooling fans and hard drives processing thousands of transactions per second. 1 person in Dante's security uniform sat at a terminal, back to the vent, fingers flying across a keyboard. 2 others stood near the door, weapons drawn, wearing tactical gear that didn't match any markings Zephyr recognized. The security guard spun his chair around and Zephyr's breath caught. Gideon Hale, the floor manager who had slapped her, who claimed his son was kidnapped, who might be the traitor her father had warned about, or might be another pawn in a game too complex for anyone to win cleanly. How much longer? One of the tactical soldiers spoke, voice muffled by his helmet. Gideon checked his watch, the gesture nervous, a man operating on the edge of his tolerance for stress. 3 minutes to finish the upload. Then Lucien will have access to every security protocol, every safe house location, every financial account, Dante's entire empire downloaded to a thumb drive. And the girl, Volkov's daughter? Safe. For now. Lucien wants her alive for the midnight broadcast, proof that he's won, that the old order is dead and the new regime is mercy when it chooses to be. He's turning the whole thing into theater. Public execution streamed live to every device in the organization, every rival who's been waiting for Dante to show weakness. Zephyr's hands found the multi-tool, fingers shaking as she selected the screwdriver head. The grill had 4 bolts, 1 in each corner, and she started with the top left, working as quietly as possible while Gideon and his guards focused on their terminal. The first bolt came free, the second, the third fought her, threads stripped or rusted or just stubborn. Zephyr applied more pressure, feeling the metal start to give, and that's when the screwdriver slipped and scraped against the grill with a sound like a fork on ceramic. All 3 heads snapped toward the vent. Gideon stood, his hand moving to a weapon at his hip. Check that. Something's in the ductwork. The tactical soldiers advanced, rifles tracking toward the grill. Zephyr abandoned the 4th bolt, grabbed the grill's edge, and pulled with every ounce of 8-year-old desperation. The metal bent but held, the last bolt refusing to yield, and she could see the soldiers raising their weapons to fire into the vent at whatever was making noise. Dante's voice crackled through the earpiece. Zephyr, get out of there! Retreat now! But Zephyr was already moving, her small fingers finding the multi-tool's knife blade and jamming it into the gap between grill and wall, using it as a lever. The 4th bolt sheared off with a crack like a breaking bone, and the grill fell inward just as the first rifle coughed, suppressed fire. Bullets punched through the vent's thin metal, tracking where she had been a second ago. Zephyr didn't look back, didn't think, just crawled forward with the phone clutched in one hand, and terror lending her speed she didn't know she possessed. Behind her she heard Gideon shouting orders, heard boots clanging on metal as someone small enough to fit climbed into the vent after her. The phone's screen showed the building schematic, and Zephyr picked a route at random. Up, toward the 3rd floor, toward spaces that might be too tight for adult pursuit. The vertical shaft materialized out of darkness, and Zephyr went up it like a monkey fleeing snakes, her muscles burning, her lungs heaving in the vent's thin air. Above, the shaft opened onto the third-floor junction where three ducts met in a space barely large enough to turn around in. Metal shrieked below her as her pursuer forced their way into the climb. Zephyr picked the duct that looked smallest, the one that made her think of birth canals and coffins and spaces where only the desperate would go. She wormed forward, the metal pressing against her shoulders, her hips, scraping skin through her hoodie and making her wonder if she'd get stuck and die here in the dark like some cautionary tale about curious children. The duct narrowed, then narrowed again. Zephyr's chest compressed, making breathing an act of will, and for a horrible moment she thought this was it. She'd crawled into a dead end and her pursuer would find her wedged here like a cork in a bottle, unable to fight or flee or do anything but wait for the bullet that would end her father's genetic line. But then the duct opened into a junction box with a grill looking down onto a room she didn't recognize. Through the slats she could see filing cabinets, a desk, and a figure slumped in a chair with their back to her. Someone unconscious or dead, cable ties binding their wrists and ankles. The pursuer's breathing echoed up from the narrow duct, closer now. Zephyr attacked the grill with the multi-tools screwdriver, not caring about noise anymore, just needing out before the space became her tomb. The bolts came free faster this time, motivated by pure survival instinct, and she dropped through the opening in a controlled fall that still rattled her teeth when she hit the floor. The figure in the chair stirred, lifting their head with the sluggish movement of someone drugged or concussed. Zephyr's breath stopped when she recognized the face, a woman in her 30s, expensive jewelry glinting at her throat, with Dante's eyes and Dante's cheekbones and the kind of terror that only comes from knowing exactly how bad things can get. Not Isabella, but someone who mattered, someone whose presence here was another move in Lucien's game. Zephyr's fingers worked at the cable ties while her mind raced through possibilities. This had to be someone from Dante's household, someone taken during the mansion raid. A relative? A girlfriend? The woman's eyes focused on Zephyr with the kind of confusion that said she was definitely drugged, trying to process why a child was suddenly freeing her from restraints. Who? Where is? Shh. I'm here to help. Can you walk? The woman tested her legs, nearly fell, caught herself against the desk. Isabella, my niece, they took her, said Dante would trade everything for her, said midnight was when the world would see what happens to tyrants. Through the earpiece, Dante's voice carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. Zephyr, that's my sister. Her name is Catalina. Get her out of there. But the vent grill above chose that moment to explode inward as Zephyr's pursuer dropped through, not one of the tactical soldiers, but the woman with the scarred eyebrow. The one who had escaped Dante's office in a cloud of smoke. She landed in a crouch, knife already in hand, eyes locked on Zephyr with the focus of someone who had been given one job and intended to complete it. Clever little bird, but you flew into the wrong room. Zephyr pushed Catalina toward the door while her other hand found the phone, 3 quick taps activating the panic button. The woman advanced, blade-weaving patterns in the air between them, and Zephyr understood with crystal clarity that she was about to die in this anonymous office, while her sister waited in a vault and Dante's daughter counted down the minutes until midnight. The door burst open. Constantine filled the frame, his face a mask of blood and fury, his weapon tracking across the room in a smooth arc that ended with the scarred woman in its sights. He fired twice, center mass, professional shots that dropped targets and didn't require follow-up. The woman folded, the knife clattering from her hand, but as she went down, her other hand moved to that same hidden trigger in her glove, the one that had deployed smoke in Dante's office. This time the payload was different, not smoke but something that hissed and sparked and filled the room with acrid fumes that made Zephyr's eyes stream and her throat close. Constantine grabbed both Zephyr and Catalina, hauling them into the hallway as the chemical fire spread with unnatural speed, eating the office's contents like it was starving. They made it 10 feet before the fire reached something volatile, Old cleaning supplies or paint thinner or just the accumulated combustibles of a century-old building, and the explosion blew them forward in a wave of heat and noise. Zephyr hit the floor rolling, her training from playground falls and childhood catastrophes keeping her skull from cracking open. Catalina wasn't so lucky, going down hard and staying down with blood leaking from a scalp wound that looked worse than it probably was. Constantine hauled himself upright, checked both of them for critical injuries, then scooped Catalina over one shoulder like she weighed nothing. "Move! Now! This whole floor is going to be an inferno in 2 minutes." They ran through corridors that were filling with smoke, past doors that glowed orange from fires spreading faster than seemed possible, past windows that cracked from heat stress and sent showers of safety glass across their path. The stairwell emerged from the haze like salvation, and they plunged into it just as the floor behind them gave way with a roar that sounded like the building was screaming. Down. Always down. Running from heat and smoke and the possibility that Lucien had planned this too, had known Zephyr would escape and lead them to Catalina, had used both of them to drive Dante's forces into predetermined kill zones. The first floor exit loomed ahead, but Constantine grabbed Zephyr's arm and pulled her past it, continuing down into the basement where the air was cooler and the smoke hadn't yet penetrated. "Can't go out the front. Lucien will have shooters positioned to cover every exit. We need the service tunnel, the one that connects to the parking structure 2 blocks over." Dante's voice came through the earpiece, tight with strain. "Constantine, status. I heard the explosion. Are they alive?" "Both alive. Catalina needs medical attention, but she'll hold. The kid..." He looked at Zephyr with something approaching awe. "The kid just saved your sister and led us straight to confirmation that Gideon is running the inside operation. Server room is his command center. We take that, we cut off Lucien's real-time intel." "Negative. The building is compromised. Get them to the extraction point and wait for my signal. I'm going after the server room myself." "Boss, you can't..." "That's not a request. Get my sister to safety. Get Tobias Ashford's daughter to safety. That's your only mission now. I'll handle the rest." The connection cut before Constantine could argue. He stood in the basement darkness for a moment, wrestling with orders and loyalty and the knowledge that Dante was about to walk into an ambush with his eyes open because the alternative was letting Lucien win without a fight. "He's going to get himself killed." Catalina's voice came out slurred but coherent, fighting through whatever drugs they'd used to keep her compliant. "That's what he does. Walks toward death because he thinks he deserves it. Has since Isabel. You can't stop him, but maybe you can give him better odds." She fumbled in her jacket pocket, pulled out a keycard stained with her own blood. "Service elevator. Bypasses the main floors, goes straight to the roof access. That's where Lucien is. Has to be. He'd want the high ground for his midnight broadcast. Wants the city as backdrop when he kills my niece on camera to prove the old regime is dead." Zephyr took the keycard with hands that had stopped shaking, which was either a good sign of shock or a bad sign of trauma she'd process later if she survived long enough for later to exist. Through the earpiece, she could hear Dante moving through the building, his breathing controlled, his footsteps deliberate. "Mr. Dante, if you're going to the roof, you should know something. The lady with the scar, she said Mr. Lucien wants to broadcast at midnight. He wants people to watch, which means he needs power and cameras and probably internet connection that can handle streaming. The roof has the building's main communications array. He'll be protecting it." Silence on the line while Dante processed this, recalculated his approach. Then his voice came back different, warmer, carrying something that sounded almost like pride. "You're right, which means I need a distraction, something to pull his attention and his assets away from the roof. Constantine, can you rig something loud?" The big Russian smiled, all blood-stained teeth and professional enthusiasm. "I can rig something loud enough to wake the dead. How much collateral damage are we accepting?" "Enough to make Lucien think we're coming through the front with everything we have. Make him commit his forces to the wrong position. Give me a window to reach Isabella." Zephyr's mind was already racing ahead, seeing the pieces move across the board her father had taught her to visualize. But if you pull his people away from the roof, who's protecting Isabella? She'll be alone up there with him, and if he realizes it's a feint, then I'd better be fast enough that it doesn't matter. Constantine, you have 15 minutes. Make them count. The connection went silent again, leaving them in a basement that smelled of old concrete and newer fear. Catalina leaned against the wall, her breathing shallow, her eyes tracking to Zephyr with the kind of focus that cut through chemical haze and head trauma. You're Tobias's daughter. You look like him. Same eyes, same stubborn jaw. He saved my life once, you know. 6 years ago during the fire. Pulled me out of the building before the roof collapsed. I never got to thank him. He's dead now. So is the lady he couldn't save. And maybe a lot more people will be dead before midnight if we don't. Zephyr stopped, looked at the phone in her hand, at the building schematic that showed exactly where Gideon and his servers were positioned, at the ventilation system that she now knew better than the adults chasing her through it. An idea crystallized, terrible and necessary, and exactly the kind of thing her father would have done if he were small enough and desperate enough and in love with people who needed saving. Mr. Constantine, I know how to cut off Mr. Lucien's intel and give Mr. Dante his distraction, but you're not going to like it. Kid, I already don't like anything about this situation. Try me. Zephyr explained, watching his face cycle through horror and reluctant admiration and the slow acceptance that sometimes the only way forward was to let the sparrow fly straight into the tiger's mouth and hope she had sharp enough talons to make him choke. Constantine stared at Zephyr like she'd proposed flying to the moon using bedsheets and optimism. The basement's emergency lighting cast his battered face in sharp relief. Broken nose, swelling purple, shoulder wound seeping through field dressing. Eyes that had seen too many operations go sideways to trust a plan built on the structural integrity of an 8-year-old's courage. You want to crawl back into the server room, the one we just escaped from, the one that's currently filling with armed hostiles who know you were there, and manually corrupt Lucien's data stream while Gideon and his people are actively using it. Not corrupt, redirect. There's a difference. Zephyr pulled up the building schematic on the phone, fingers tracing the route she'd already memorized. The ventilation system connects to the server room from 3 angles. They'll be watching the one I used before, but not the secondary intake that feeds the cooling system. It's smaller, tighter, but I can fit. Once I'm in, I don't need to fight anyone. I just need 30 seconds at the right terminal. Catalina slid down the wall until she was sitting, her hand pressed against the bleeding scalp wound with the automatic pressure of someone who'd dealt with worse injuries and survived. What happens in 30 seconds? I reroute the security feeds instead of showing Mr. Lucien what's really happening. We show him what we want him to see. Old footage, looped. Mr. Dante moving toward the front entrance with all his people. A full assault that doesn't exist. He'll pull everyone to defend the main approach. Leave the roof vulnerable. Constantine's expression shifted from skepticism to something more dangerous, the look of a tactician seeing an opening he hadn't considered. We'd need someone who knows the system well enough to make the loops convincing, someone who can make Lucien's people believe they're seeing live feeds when they're watching ghosts. Gideon knows the system. He's been using it to feed information to Mr. Lucien all night, which means his terminal has administrator access, and if I can reach it, you'll be in a room with armed guards and a man who has every reason to kill you on sight. This is insane. Your father would never— My father died because he tried to protect everyone except himself. He taught me that sometimes the only way to win is to risk the thing you can't afford to lose. He taught me that sparrows survive by being too small to hit and too fast to catch and too stubborn to quit when everything says they should. The words hung in the recycled air, carrying weight beyond their syllables. Catalina's eyes tracked between Zephyr and Constantine, seeing the argument play out in their postures and breathing patterns, reading body language the way combat veterans learn to read terrain. The girl's right. Lucien's been playing chess while Dante's been playing checkers. Only way to win is to flip the board. Let her try. Constantine pulled out his tactical tablet, already running scenarios, calculating odds that didn't improve, no matter how many times he reconfigured variables. 11 minutes until the distraction needed to be active. 6 floors between their current position and the server room. Unknown number of hostiles between here and there. One child who weighed maybe 70 pounds carrying the entire plan on shoulders that shouldn't have to bear this weight. If I let you do this and you die, your sister will kill me. Slowly, creatively, using medical knowledge to keep me alive for the parts that should be fatal. If you don't let me try and Mr. Dante's daughter dies at midnight on camera, Sienna won't need to kill you. You'll do it yourself. I've seen that look before. On my daddy after he realized he'd failed to save someone who mattered. It ate him from inside until there wasn't enough left to fight the poison when it came. The truth of this observation landed like a physical blow. Constantine had seen that same self-destruction in Dante's eyes after Isabel's death. Watched it hollow him out until nothing remained but the mechanics of violence and the rituals of an empire built on sand and scar tissue. 10 minutes. That's all I can give you. 10 minutes from when you enter that vent to when the distraction triggers, because that's when every hostile in this building converges on the front entrance. You're not out by then. You're on your own. Understood? Zephyr nodded, already moving toward the basement's mechanical room, where the cooling intake vents began their journey through the building's infrastructure. Catalina caught her arm as she passed, grip weak but insistent. Isabella, when you see her, if you see her, tell her Aunt Cat loves her. Tell her to be brave. Tell her that monsters are just people who forgot they were human, and sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be scared to remind them what they lost. The mechanical room hummed with the white noise of HVAC systems pushing air through miles of ductwork. Zephyr found the cooling intake behind a panel marked Authorized Personnel Only, held shut with screws that surrendered to the multi-tools practice touch. The opening was barely 18 inches square, designed for airflow rather than human passage. And looking into its darkness felt like staring into a throat that might swallow her whole. Constantine helped her climb up, his large hands steadying her until she found purchase on the vent's interior surface. Radio silence once you're inside. Can't risk Lucien's people intercepting our comms. You see anything you can't handle, you run. No heroics, no last stands. Tobias would haunt me if I let his daughter die playing soldier in a war she didn't start. He'd haunt you worse if I lived but didn't try. That's the difference between surviving and being alive. Then she was crawling forward into metal darkness, the phone's screen her only light, the building's schematic her only map. The cooling intake was exactly as tight as she'd feared, metal pressing against her spine and chest simultaneously, forcing her to move in increments measured by exhaled breath and compressed ribs. The air tasted of machine oil and thermal paste and the accumulated dust of decades. Behind her, Constantine's voice faded to nothing as the vent swallowed distance and sound. Ahead, the junction that would take her up 3 floors toward the server room waited like a promise or a threat, depending on whether optimism or realism held sway. Zephyr climbed, hand over hand on rungs that were never meant to support human weight, metal groaning protest she prayed wouldn't carry to ears that might recognize the sound of infiltration. Her shoulders screamed from the confined space, her lungs burned from air that had already been processed by too many machines, and sweat turned the phone slippery in her grip. The server room's cooling intake manifested as a horizontal shaft barely wide enough for her torso. Zephyr wormed into it, pulling herself forward on elbows that were developing bruises she'd feel tomorrow if tomorrow arrived. Through the grill ahead, she could hear voices. Gideon's nervous tenor, the tactical team's clipped military responses, and underneath it all, the steady hum of servers processing the data that was giving Lucien his advantage. Uploads complete. Lucien has full access to security protocols, personnel files, financial records, everything. Gideon's voice carried the hollow satisfaction of someone who'd completed a task, but couldn't shake the feeling it would cost him more than he'd bargained for. One of the tactical soldiers responded with the flat effect of someone following orders without questioning their morality. Confirmation received. Primary objective achieved. Secondary objective, elimination of witnesses, proceeds at midnight per the plan. Maintain position until then. What about the girl, the one in the vents? You said she was eliminated in the fire. Thermal imaging shows no survivors on the third floor. Structural collapse guarantees no recovery of remains. She's gone. Focus on maintaining our perimeter until the broadcast. Zephyr held her breath, counting seconds, waiting for her heart to slow enough that its hammering wouldn't give her away. The grill before her was held by 4 screws that had been painted over so many times the slots were nearly stripped. She worked the multi-tool into the first one, applying pressure that was firm without being forceful, coaxing rather than demanding. The first screw surrendered after 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. The second came easier, threads releasing their grip on metal that had held them for years. The third fought her until her hand cramped and she had to pause, fingers shaking from sustained effort in a space too small for proper leverage. Below, one of the tactical soldiers moved closer to the vent, close enough that Zephyr could see the top of his helmet through the grill's slots. He stopped directly beneath her position, pulled out a phone, checked something that made him grunt with satisfaction. Movement on the south perimeter, multiple heat signatures converging on the main entrance. Looks like Volkov's making his play. Konstantine's distraction activating early, or Lucian's people seeing patterns that didn't exist because they expected attack from that direction. Either way, it pulled attention away from the ceiling vent where an 8-year-old was trying to unscrew her way into the heart of enemy operations. The third screw came free. Zephyr attacked the fourth with renewed urgency, knowing she had maybe 2 minutes before the tactical team received orders to redeploy before the server room emptied and took her opportunity with it. The screwdriver bit into stripped metal, slipped, bit again. The screw turned, half a rotation, full rotation, 2, 3. The fourth screw dropped onto the server room floor with a ping that sounded like a gunshot in the confined space. Every head snapped upward. The tactical soldier directly below Zephyr raised his weapon toward the grill just as she shoved it aside and dropped through the opening, falling onto his shoulders with all 70 pounds of desperate momentum. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and body armor. Zephyr rolled away, her small size an advantage in close quarters, coming up next to the terminal where Gideon sat frozen in shock. The second tactical soldier swung his rifle toward her, but she was already moving, small hands flying across the keyboard with the speed of someone who'd watched her father work miracles with computers and had inherited his muscle memory for shortcuts. Administrator login screen. Gideon's credentials were still active, his password saved in the browser's memory because people were predictable and lazy even when lives hung in the balance. Zephyr was in the system in 4 keystrokes, navigating to the security feed controls while bullets chewed up the desk to her left and the tactical team closed in from 2 angles. She found the loop function buried 3 menus deep, grabbed the timestamp from 2 hours ago when Dante's forces were at full strength and positioned throughout the building. Copy. Paste. Redirect to Lucian's feed. The system fought her, throwing up authentication requests and confirmation dialogues, precious seconds evaporating while men with guns covered the distance between them and her. A hand grabbed the back of her hoodie, lifting her off the ground. Zephyr's fingers stayed on the keyboard, slapping the enter key one final time before she lost contact with the terminal. The screen flashed green. Feed redirected. Loop active. Got you, little bird. The voice belonged to the soldier whose shoulders she'd landed on, his nose bleeding from the impact, his free hand reaching for the knife at his belt with clear intent. Zephyr kicked backward, her heel connecting with something so that made him grunt and loosen his grip. She dropped, rolled under the server rack, came up on the other side with nowhere left to run. The explosion that ripped through the Azure Lounge's south wall arrived with the force of an angry god announcing its displeasure. The building shook hard enough to knock the tactical team off their feet, hard enough to crack plaster and send ceiling tiles raining down, hard enough that Zephyr heard the servers themselves cry out in electronic distress as power fluctuated and circuits struggled to compensate. Constantine's distraction, right on schedule and apparently involving more explosives than strictly necessary for subtlety. Zephyr used the chaos to scramble back into the ventilation shaft, pulling herself up with arms that were past exhaustion and running on pure survival instinct. Behind her, the tactical team was shouting into radios, receiving orders to deploy to the south wall, abandoning the server room to respond to the threat they thought was real. Gideon alone remained staring at the terminal screen where the looped footage was now feeding false information to Lucien's people. He looked up at the vent where Zephyr crouched, his face cycling through fear and resignation, and something that might have been relief. Your father, Tobias, he knew, didn't he? Knew that I was compromised. That's why he died, trying to warn Volkov, trying to stop what I'd set in motion. Zephyr's voice came out raw from exertion and smoke inhalation. He knew someone was feeding information to Mr. Lucien. He didn't know it was you. Didn't want to believe anyone could choose this. They have my son, 6 years old. What was I supposed to choose, my boy's life or loyalty to a man who built his empire on corpses and calls it justice? You were supposed to ask for help. Mr. Dante would have saved your son. That's what my daddy said about him. He's a monster who protects his people because that's all he has left of being human. You didn't give him the chance. Gideon's laugh came out broken. And now that you've sabotaged the feeds, Lucien will know someone's interfering. He'll tighten security on the roof, make getting to Isabella impossible. You may have just killed that little girl by being too clever. Or I gave Mr. Dante the opening he needs because Mr. Lucien will be looking at ghosts while the real threat comes from where he's not watching. That's what my daddy called asymmetric warfare, making the enemy commit to fighting a battle that isn't happening while the real war happens somewhere else. She pulled herself back into the vent, leaving Gideon alone with his choices and his compromised soul. The return journey went faster despite her exhaustion, gravity assisting the descent she'd climbed on pure stubbornness. The building shook twice more, smaller explosions, Constantine's team making the distraction convincing enough that Lucien would have to respond with overwhelming force. The basement mechanical room materialized below her like salvation. Zephyr dropped through the intake vent into Constantine's waiting arms, the big Russian catching her with surprising gentleness for someone whose primary skill set involved creative violence. It's done. The feeds are looped. Mr. Lucien is seeing what we want him to see. Constantine set her down, checked her for injuries with professional efficiency, found nothing critical but catalogued bruises and scrapes that would hurt worse tomorrow. Dante's already moving. Took the service elevator to the roof access while everyone was focused on our fireworks display. If Lucien bought the misdirection, he's walking into a trap with his guard down. If he didn't, then we hope Mr. Dante is as good as my daddy said he was. Catalina had regained enough function to stand unassisted, though her balance remained questionable and the scalp wound continued its slow leak. She moved toward the basement exit that led to the service tunnel, each step carefully measured against the concussion threatening to send her seaways. We need to get clear before Lucien realizes the feeds are compromised. Once he figures out he's been blind for the last 10 minutes, this entire building becomes a kill box. But Zephyr was already moving in the opposite direction, toward the stairwell that would take her up instead of out, toward the roof where everything would resolve one way or another. Constantine caught her arm before she made it 3 steps. Absolutely not. Absolutely. Your part is done. You delivered the opening. Now you extract while you still can. Isabella doesn't know Mr. Dante is coming. She's 6 years old, alone with a man who wants to hurt her to prove a point, probably terrified past thinking. If I can get to her first, warn her, help her stay calm when Mr. Dante makes his move, you'll get yourself killed and make his daughter watch it happen. Which will traumatize her worse than anything Lucien could do. The answer is no. Zephyr pulled against his grip, her voice rising to match her desperation. You said my daddy saved Catalina during the fire. You know why? Because he didn't calculate odds or wait for backup or make smart tactical decisions. He saw someone who needed saving and he ran toward the fire instead of away from it, because that's what it means to be human instead of just surviving. Constantine's face went through several expressions too complex to catalog, landing on the grim acceptance of someone who'd lost this argument before and knew he'd lose it again. 5 minutes. You get to the roof access point, you stay hidden, and the second Dante has Isabella secured, you retreat. Those are the rules. Break them, and I will personally drag you out of this building by your ankles. The stairwell was concrete, an echo, and the accumulated smell of 100 years of people climbing towards something better or running from something worse. Zephyr took the stairs 2 at a time despite legs that were threatening mutiny, using the handrail to pull herself upward when muscle power failed. Behind her, Constantine and Catalina followed at a pace constrained by injuries and tactical awareness, checking each landing for ambush before committing to the next flight. Somewhere far below, the building groaned as Constantine's explosives continued their work of structural intimidation. Somewhere above, Dante was threading through whatever defenses Lucien had positioned around the roof access, moving with the silent purpose of a man who had nothing left to lose except the one thing he'd spent 6 years trying to protect through isolation and violence. The roof access door materialized at the top of the stairwell, secured by a keypad that glowed red in the emergency lighting. Catalina's blood-stained keycard slid into the reader, and the lock disengaged with a click that sounded like permission granted. Beyond the door, New Orleans spread out in electric sprawl, the French Quarter's neon bleeding into the warehouse district's converted elegance, the Mississippi River a black ribbon reflecting city lights, and above it all the sky that had forgotten how to hold stars beneath the light pollution. The roof itself was a landscape of HVAC equipment, satellite dishes, and the communications array that Lucien needed for his midnight broadcast. Zephyr pushed through the door into air that tasted of river moisture and coming rain. The roof stretched before her like a stage set for tragedy, and in the center of it all, backlit by the communications array's indicator lights, stood Lucien Moreau. He was taller than she'd expected from vent glimpses and second-hand descriptions, broad-shouldered despite the burn scars that mapped the left side of his body in topography of pain survived and never forgotten. His face was a ruin on that side, skin pulled tight over bone in ways that suggested multiple reconstructive surgeries, the scar she'd seen on his neck just the visible edge of damage that ran deeper than flesh. In his left hand he held the silver lighter, clicking it open and closed with rhythmic precision. Click-snap, click-snap, click-snap. In his right hand, fingers wrapped in Isabella's dark curls, he held a little girl who had cried herself past terror into the numb acceptance of someone too young to understand why adults hurt each other but old enough to know she was caught in the crossfire. Uncle Dante will come for me, he promised. Isabella's voice came out small but steady, carrying the kind of faith that children invest in adults who haven't yet proven themselves unworthy. Lucien's grip tightened in her hair just enough to make her wince, just enough to remind her that faith was a luxury she couldn't currently afford. Your uncle is watching his empire burn on a dozen screens right now, sweetheart. He's seeing his people die, his holdings fall, his legacy crumble into ash the way mine did. By the time he realizes the feeds are lies, midnight will be here and the whole world will watch him lose the one thing he still pretends to care about. Zephyr pressed herself flat against an HVAC unit, making her profile as small as possible, trying to become part of the rooftop's architecture rather than a target. She could see 4 of Lucien's people positioned at strategic points around the perimeter, weapons trained on approach vectors waiting for an assault that would come from predictable directions because that's how professionals operated. None of them were watching the service access door that Dante would use, because the looped feeds had shown it locked and unbreached for the past 2 hours. None of them were looking for the child-sized shadow creeping closer to Isabella's position, because children weren't supposed to be variables in adult mathematics of violence. The communications array hummed with active systems, multiple cameras positioned to capture Isabella from flattering angles, production value for an execution that would be witnessed by everyone in Lucien's organization and everyone in Dante's. A statement broadcast so widely that the old power structures would dissolve in its wake, and new hierarchies could form. 2 minutes to midnight, time to get the cameras rolling. Time to show the city what happens when tigers grow old and soft and forget that the jungle belongs to whoever has the sharpest teeth. One of Lucien's people moved to activate the broadcast equipment, flipping switches that brought monitors online with the sub-chime of systems achieving operational status. On the screens, Zephyr could see what Lucien was seeing. His own image reflected back. Isabella held before him like a sacrifice, and in the background, the Azure Lounge burning with fires that Constantine's team had started to sell the deception. The service door whispered open on hinges that Dante must have oiled in advance. A detail so small it would have been meaningless, except it meant the difference between silent approach and tactical failure. He emerged from the stairwell like shadow gaining substance, moving across the rooftop with the fluid certainty of someone who had mapped this terrain in his mind 1,000 times. One of Lucien's perimeter guards turned, some instinct warning him that the geometry of the space had changed. Dante's hand was already moving, fingers finding pressure points that shut down consciousness without requiring the noise of gunfire. The guard folded, and Dante lowered him to the rooftop with the care of someone who killed when necessary but took no joy in it. 3 guards remaining. Dante closed on the second knife appearing in his hand, with the magic of practiced violence, the blade finding kidney and liver in silence that was more terrible than screaming. The guard tried to turn to warn the others, but his body was already shutting down faster than his brain could process, and Dante eased him down before the collapse could alert. 2 guards left, both watching the communications array where Lucien was adjusting camera angles, checking audio levels, preparing to speak to an audience that would number in the thousands once the broadcast went live. Zephyr saw Dante's path to them, saw the angles he'd need to cover, saw the 3-second window where he'd be exposed to crossfire if both guards reacted simultaneously. She looked at Isabella, at the little girl's eyes tracking movement she couldn't quite see in her peripheral vision, at the hope warring with terror in features that echoed Dante's own. The decision crystallized with the same terrible clarity that had driven her into vents and server rooms and spaces where children weren't supposed to go. Zephyr stood, making herself visible, making herself loud in the silence Dante needed. "Mr. Lucien, the feeds are fake! Mr. Dante is already here!" Every head on that rooftop swung toward her voice. The 2 remaining guards raised their weapons, tracking toward this impossible child who had appeared from nowhere. Lucien's hand clenched in Isabella's hair hard enough to make her cry out, his face cycling through shock and rage and the dawning understanding that he'd been playing chess against someone willing to flip the board. Dante used their distraction like the gift it was. 2 shots, suppressed but still audible in the rooftop's acoustic space, and both guards went down with the professional efficiency of someone who had been making difficult shots under worse conditions since before Zephyr was born. But Lucien still held Isabella, and his free hand was already moving toward the gun at his hip, and even Dante couldn't cross the distance before a trigger pull could end the life he'd spent 6 years trying to protect, through emotional amputation and careful isolation. Clever, using the child to misdirect my attention. Using the feeds to blind me. Very clever, brother. But not clever enough because I still hold the one card you can't beat. Put down your weapon or I paint this rooftop with her blood and make you watch. Dante's gun lowered by degrees, reluctance in every inch of descent. His eyes met Zephyr's across the distance, and she saw something in them that might have been gratitude or condemnation or both. Acknowledgement that she'd given him an opening at a cost he'd never wanted her to pay. "Let her go, Lucien. This is between us. It was always between us. Isabella is innocent in this. Innocence is a lie we tell ourselves to pretend the world has rules. You taught me that. The night you chose your empire over Isabel, over our brotherhood, over everything we'd built together. You taught me that love is weakness and mercy is suicide, and the only truth is power." Lucien's voice was breaking apart around the edges, grief and rage bleeding through the careful control he'd maintained. The lighter in his left hand continued its rhythm. 3 beats like a heartbeat, 3 beats like the last words of someone burning alive. "I loved her. Did you know that? Isabel. I loved her the way you were supposed to love her, the way she deserved to be loved. But she chose you. Chose the monster who would kill her rather than the man who would have died for her. And when she realized what you were, when she tried to leave, when she came to me for help, you used her. Used her pregnancy to drive a wedge between us. Used her trust to position yourself for a power play. I protected her. Told her to run, to take the baby and disappear where you couldn't find her, but she wouldn't. Said she had faith you'd change, that love could reach even a soul as corrupted as yours. So I tried to save you both, tried to stop the shipment that would have brought the whole organization down around our ears. And you repaid me by setting that warehouse on fire with all of us inside. The truth of this hung between them like smoke, reshaping 6 years of assumed history. Dante's face went pale, his weapon hand shaking with the weight of realization and regret. You were trying to save me, and you chose wrong, chose power over people, empire over family, and when the fire came, I couldn't reach her in time. I heard her screaming your name while she burned. Heard her begging you to save the baby, and I heard silence from you. Silence and footsteps walking away. Lucien's gun rose from his hip, the muzzle pressing against Isabella's temple with enough force to make her whimper. His finger tightened on the trigger, and Zephyr could see the math playing out in his eyes. How many lives had to be destroyed to balance the ledger? How much pain would finally be enough to fill the hole that Isabel's death had carved in him? So here's the new math, brother. Your daughter for mine. The child you could have had if you'd chosen differently, traded for the child you failed to protect. Seems fair, seems like justice, seems like the universe finally balancing its books. Isabella looked at her uncle across the rooftop, her 6-year-old mind processing adult concepts of sacrifice and debt in ways that would scar her regardless of how this night resolved. "Uncle Dante, I'm scared." The admission broke something in Dante's expression, some final barrier between the monster he'd become and the man he'd buried beneath 6 years of scar tissue and practiced cruelty. He took one step forward, then another, his weapon hanging loose in his grip. "Take me instead. Let Isabella go. Shoot me. Broadcast it to whoever you want. Make it mean something." "But she's innocent, Lucien. She's what Isabel wanted to protect. She's the future our daughter should have had." "Your daughter. Not mine. Never mine. That was the problem all along, wasn't it? You took everything. The organization, the woman I loved, even the possibility of family, left me with nothing but scars and rage and 6 years to perfect my revenge." Zephyr was moving before conscious thought caught up to survival instinct, her small form darting across the rooftop toward Isabella's position. One of Lucien's downed guards had dropped a smoke grenade, the kind tactical teams used for concealment, and her fingers found it while adults were focused on their confrontation. She pulled the pin, threw it with all the strength her 8-year-old arm could generate. The canister bounced once, twice, rolled to a stop at Lucien's feet, and began pouring dense white smoke that turned the rooftop into fog and chaos. Lucien's gun tracked toward the sound of Zephyr's movement, But Dante was already in motion, crossing the distance in long strides that ate space faster than seemed possible. His shoulder hit Lucien's center mass, driving them both away from Isabella, sending the gun skittering across asphalt. They went down in a tangle that was more brawl than technique, fists finding flesh with the desperation of men who had been brothers once, and enemies now and somewhere in between still remembered what they'd lost. The smoke consumed them, turned their violence into shadows and grunts and the meaty percussion of impacts. Zephyr reached Isabella, grabbed the little girl's hand, pulled her toward the service door where Constantine waited with his weapon trained on the smoke. Isabella ran like her life required it, small legs pumping, dark curls streaming behind her, and Zephyr ran with her, refusing to let go of the hand that gripped hers with bruising force. They burst through the service door into the stairwell where Catalina caught Isabella with the fierce embrace of family reunited, where Constantine swept both children behind his bulk and raised his weapon toward the rooftop in case anything hostile emerged from the smoke. The building shook, not from explosives this time, but from something deeper, some structural complaint, as fires on lower floors found load-bearing supports and began the mathematics of collapse. Constantine made a decision visible in his posture, in the way his jaw set and his finger moved from trigger guard to trigger. "We're leaving. Now. Building's coming down and I'm not losing anyone else tonight." But Mr. Dante made his choice. Bought you time to run, bought his daughter time to survive. Don't waste it by looking back. That's an order. They descended through smoke and heat, Constantine leading, Catalina carrying Isabella despite her own injuries, Zephyr bringing up the rear with her hand trailing the wall because the emergency lighting had failed and darkness was absolute. The service tunnel entrance appeared like salvation, cool air flowing from the parking structure 2 blocks away, promising escape from a building that was consuming itself. Behind them, another explosion, bigger this time. The Azure Lounge's south wall giving way completely, the structure folding in on itself with the groan of steel surrendering to physics and fire. Zephyr looked back once, saw flames licking from windows that framed the night sky, saw the communications array on the roof sparking and failing, and then they were in the tunnel, running through darkness with the sound of collapse chasing them, emerging into the parking structure where Constantine had vehicles waiting and drivers who didn't ask questions. Isabella was bundled into the back seat, Catalina beside her, both of them wrapped in emergency blankets that did nothing for the shaking that came from shock rather than cold. Zephyr stood in the parking structure's fluorescent wash, looking back toward the Azure Lounge, watching it burn against the New Orleans sky. Constantine's hand landed on her shoulder, heavy with regret and respect. "Your father would be proud, reckless as hell, but proud to see." "Is Mr. Dante dead?" "Don't know. Building came down before I could confirm. If he got out, he'll contact us. If he didn't..." The parking structure's entrance admitted a figure that moved like a ghost given substance, clothes torn and bloody, face covered in soot and contusions, limping on a leg that might have been broken and splinted with stubborn refusal to quit. Dante emerged into the light, and behind him he dragged Lucienne, unconscious or dead, cable-tied at wrists and ankles. "He lives, for now. FBI will want him for testimony, and I owe him that much." Chance to tell his side of the story, chance to make Isabel's death mean something beyond revenge and ashes. Isabella's scream cut through the parking structure's acoustic space, a sound of pure relief and joy and trauma releasing in the only way 6-year-olds knew how. She launched herself from the car, running toward her uncle with arms outstretched, and Dante dropped to his knees to catch her, to hold her, to press his face into her hair and shake with sobs he'd held back for 6 years. Catalina approached her brother, touched his shoulder with the gentleness of someone who understood that strength and vulnerability could coexist. "The building? Gone. Evidence, servers, everything Lucian collected. FBI will have a harder time building their case, but Gideon's testimony might be enough. He was still in the server room when the fires reached critical. Constantine pulled him out during extraction. He'll talk to save his son. Zephyr watched this reunion from a distance that felt both physical and metaphysical, separated from the Volkov family by bloodlines and history, and the simple fact that her role in this night was finished. She had been the sparrow that saved the tiger, had paid the debt her father left behind, and now the mathematics of survival meant returning to the life she'd interrupted. Waitress sister, medical debt, and the slow grind of poverty that had been her normal before tonight shattered it. Dante stood, Isabella still in his arms, and crossed to where Zephyr stood. He knelt again, bringing himself to her eye level, and the expression on his face was something she'd seen in photographs but never expected to witness in person. Tobias Ashford's closest friend, before violence and time had carved away everything soft. The tiger owes the sparrow, your father's words. I didn't understand what he meant until tonight. Didn't understand that debts can be paid forward instead of back, that saving one life can redeem a lifetime of mistakes. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a bank card that looked official and intimidating. This is yours and your sister's. Clean money, legally documented, enough to clear your father's debts and put you both through school and give you choices he would have wanted you to have. Zephyr took the card with hands that had stopped shaking, looking at the numbers embossed on its surface. More money than she could imagine. More than enough. More than she'd ever expected from a night that had started with whiskey and poison and a scream that stopped a monster from drinking death. Isabella, when you're old enough to understand what happened tonight, I want you to know something. The little girl looked at Zephyr with eyes that would carry this night forever, that would wake up from nightmares and remember the child who had run toward danger when adults said to hide. Monsters are just people who forgot they were human. And sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be scared to remind them what they lost. Your daddy remembered tonight. Remembered he had something worth being human for. Don't let him forget again. Isabella nodded, solemn as an oath, and Zephyr knew the message had landed somewhere deep where childhood innocence and adult wisdom intersected. The parking structure's exit beckoned, leading back to a city that had continued existing while their small war resolved itself in fire and blood. Sienna would be waiting in the vault, terrified and furious and ready to hold her sister close enough to hurt. Medical debt would still exist tomorrow, but it would be manageable now, survivable, a problem to solve rather than a sentence to serve. Zephyr walked towards the exit, Constantine at her shoulder like a guard or a friend or both. Behind her, the Volkov family was gathering itself, preparing to rebuild from ruins, to face federal investigations and rival organizations and the simple question of what empire meant when you'd burn down your palace to save your soul. The New Orleans night wrapped around her like a promise or a threat, humid and electric and full of the sounds of a city that never quite slept. Somewhere in the distance, sirens converged on the Azure Lounge's burning shell. Somewhere closer, her sister was counting seconds until she could confirm Zephyr's survival. And somewhere in between, in the space between childhood and whatever came after, Zephyr Ashford walked forward into a future that her father had bought with his death, and she had earned with a scream that stopped tigers from drinking poison. The sparrow had flown, the tiger had learned, and the debt, finally, was paid.